You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome. We have an incredible treat for everybody today. As a guest, we have Rowan Curran, industry analyst at Forrester Research, who covers data science, computer vision, cognitive search, and most topics within the AI space. And he's also the most knowledgeable person I know, and definitely the most knowledgeable industry analyst I have met on the topic of generative AI. And for those of you who don't know, I know more industry analysts than any sane person would. So thank you very much, Rowan, for being here. We are going to be talking about generative AI, the most exciting topic in artificial intelligence, definitely right now, arguably potentially in artificial intelligence ever. That remains to be seen. We're going to be talking about what you need to know about generative AI, how to separate the hype from what's actually valuable. We'll be talking about how to generate a strategy around implementing generative AI and taking advantage of that and setting yourself up for success. And along the way, covering the things that you need to know as a leader. How not, for example, to make a fool of yourself in front of data science. Always important when it comes to the AI topic. So, Rowan, I would love to get us started with probably the most important thing when it comes to artificial intelligence. It over and over again comes up, and that is terminology. What are we talking about when we're talking about generative AI? Is this the same thing as large language models, transformer encoder-decoder networks, or generative adversarial networks in here as well? What are we referring to these days?
Yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you for that lovely intro. So I think it's a fantastic spot to get started with the terminology here. So when we're talking about generative AI, and this is the definition that we use at Forrester, the definition in the broader space can kind of be a little fuzzy depending on who you talk to, but the way that we look at it is that it's a set of technologies that includes large language models, it includes GANs, it includes diffusion models. Mostly, as you can tell, those are mostly based on transformer networks, though not all of them. So this is a big part of it. And it's all around oriented around these models that are used to generate content rather than, say, generate a prediction, which is what we've really thought of predictive models and AI models doing in the past. So this is used for the purpose of generating text, as we're all familiar with, as well as image-based content and increasingly video and audio content as well. So it's really any set of tools and techniques to generate this new form of content. We have a set of technologies that we know that I just described, but there may be more techniques that develop over time. And then there's additional pieces to this, like reinforcement learning from human feedback that are applied to some of these models and other techniques that enable us to build applications with generative AI that really are more so when people think of generative AI in the broader way. So if we think about like ChatGPT, that is a large language model, but it has a reinforcement with human feedback layer as well as other components to make that experience for the end user.
So arguably, generative is really more about the capability or the output of it more than it is about the underlying technology, at least in theory. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. It's in terms of what can we actually get out of these models rather than what is the structure of the model underneath, because as we've talked about, there's a couple of different approaches currently that exist to this.
It makes sense. But in terms of what folks are most excited about right now, where the seeming breakthrough has happened, is that on a particular set? Is that just on the transformer networks / large language models / foundation models? Are those all the same thing? And are those the things that everybody is today really referring to when they're slapping on that moniker of generative AI?
Yeah, so broadly, when people are talking about generative AI now, most people are talking about this text generation space. People are also talking about the image generation space, but mostly talking about the image generation. And so if we're looking at this piece of it, this is largely around the large language models, which are using transformer networks to actually build the model itself. The use of diffusion models and GANs, that has also been around for a number of years. And while there are continuing breakthroughs in that space as well, the excitement over the past several months has really been around the advancements with the large language models. And just in the past few weeks, now we're moving beyond just the large language models themselves, but we've had some significant breakthroughs around multimodal large language models, which bring this space even farther forward, even faster than we thought it was going to.
And multimodal is here models that are able to process text and structured data as well as things like images or audio or sensor data and other things like that. Is that what we're referring to when we talk about multimodal capabilities?
Yeah, so you can essentially think of it as being able to interact with these models not just through text, but through whatever other type of medium you might want. Today, it's images and audio, but you could see this moving forward as we start to get better signal data from haptic sensors or other types of things like that. So this multimodal piece is the first step into really adding more almost sensory capabilities to some of these large language models. And you can see this in the launch of GPT-4. They talked about this, and I think we're going to be adding in more of this multimodal nature in an adjacent way with things like the plug-in architectures that are being built for stuff like GPT-4 now.
It's very exciting. So in terms of a multimodal model, this is a model that I could, for example, go up to and never say anything to or never give it anything other than just smile at it. And theoretically, it would know then to respond to me and generate some introductory text or something like that?
If the application had been set up to do so, yes. So we always got to give that caveat, right? So basically, you could essentially have an application that's set up to say, all right, take, a screenshot of, the user's face and understand what's going on. And it would not only say, like, here's a picture of Shell smiling, but, oh, Shell happens to be standing in front of an ice cream shop and, there's an ice cream cone in Shell's hands. So the large language model would not just say, okay, I'm reading happy sentiment from that image, but it would be able to say, Shell is happy because he's holding an ice cream cone. That's the degree of contextual semantic understanding from the images that these multimodal large language models are able to achieve. And that is something that was previously limited to very, very specifically trained image classifiers and things of that nature. Whereas this is, again, it's almost the same thing with what regular large language models have done to the text space. It's taken these very challenging use cases and basically made them possible to accomplish for many, many more users. And I think that's about to translate into the computer vision space over the next couple of years as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I wanted to get into that question of why now? Why is this all of a sudden different from what we been talking about before? But I think you're starting to touch on this. Part of this seems to be in that the range of tasks and applications has become a lot broader for an individual model and for a single architecture. So whereas previously you could go after a bunch of different use cases, but you'd be using a bespoke architecture for each one of them, and even within each domain, it would be something very narrow. It sounds like what you're hinting at is one of the reasons why this is so different is that actually the same architecture, the same model can go in and really tackle this much broader range of capabilities, and sometimes ones that we didn't necessarily even train it for. Is that what's different, or are there other things that you're seeing that are different and the reason why we're all talking about generative AI right now?
Yeah, I would say that is one of the really big important changes here. And I think it's one of the almost shocking evolutions in this space to those of us who have been paying attention for years. Very much for a long time, the conventional wisdom, and it wasn't even conventional wisdom, it was like, this is what is possible, was that you built a model for a specific use case, and that was essentially what you could use it for. But these large language models, because they're trained on such large corpuses of data, and because they use transformer networks, which allow their nodes to understand multiple pieces of data in context at once, we can have tools that are able to be applied to really arbitrary tasks and perform quite well. And that is a very big difference from almost any other type of model that we've had in the past. And there's huge advantages to that, and that's exciting the space to a great degree, but there's still some limitations around only being able to run these in environments where you can actually fit them. So there's been a lot of discussion around the size of these models. They are quite large. Some of the numbers that I've heard for GPT, one of the 3.5 models, but it was something like 1.3 terabytes between the storage and the compute needed to run it. Whereas most of us don't have 1.3 terabytes on our local laptops to run a model like this, much less do all the other applications that we would need to run. But one of the very exciting things that has happened again just in the past couple of weeks is with the release of the Llama family of models, and then the the research from Stanford on being able to run that on a much smaller machine, you can basically now, in theory, train these models for a few $100s, which is 100 orders of magnitude less than what was previously, the low end of these things. So that opens up the door for many, many more people to build these models and to put them into, a whole bunch of different scenarios. Because, previously it was like we would always have to call back to the cloud to get the inferences from these models. Whereas now we can look to a future where it may be possible in the next few years to have a large language model running on your smartphone, on your laptop, on whatever other device, and to have that then get very, very personalized for you, because the data doesn't necessarily have to leave and go anywhere else, and it can build its reinforcement feedback based just on its interactions with you. So we can really see how that could, really change the whole conversation around personal assistance and things like that, which, have been okay for years, but are essentially, pretty dumb and fragile when it comes to dealing with novel scenarios.
Well, it does certainly seem like this space is changing far more rapidly than it did previously, in the sense of that there were obviously incredible advances that were going on all the time when it came to especially the deep learning space. But it does feel like the art of the possible, that frontier seems to be changing now almost on a weekly, sometimes even daily basis. And it seems to be getting into the hands of individuals to try it in a way that's much faster. Is that something new, or is that something where, no, well, it's been going on, but we just haven't been paying attention?
Oh, I think that the ability of the average human to be able to play with these tools is one of the really big differences in this particular technological moment than we have had pretty much ever. Like, I challenge anyone to come up with a scenario where just by having an internet connection, you were able to have access to some of the most powerful software tools that exist in the world for just the cost of that internet connection. And there is obviously a certain amount of resources and privilege needed to have that internet connection in the first place, but the amount of people that are able to interact with these tools, to experiment with them, to ideate with them is so much larger than pretty much any other technology that we've had in the past. Whether it was the launch of the public internet, in the 90s that brought hundreds of thousands and maybe a few million people to this broad-based platform. But prior to that, nothing like this. And now we have tens of millions of people interacting with some of the most advanced technology that exists and trying it out and seeing what can we do with this, looking towards the future. And so for me, a big part of looking at the AI space is saying, well, when we build models or AI applications, they are just a reflection of us. And so if we have a much broader swath of us, then we are going to build much better applications in the long run, and we're going to make much better decisions about this technology. What is really exciting right now is that people can just get access to the tool itself and then start to even explore how they can build something themselves, either on their own machine with some open source tools, or by using any arbitrary cloud server and just throwing a model up in there, or by using a vendor tool. So really the amount of people that can start building with this technology right now, that is a really big difference from previous technological moments. But I think it's also important to note that this technology itself is not brand new. It has been, I would say, a little over half a decade, I think, since we had the release of the first papers around transformers. We had GANs for a few years, or a number of years before that. And then diffusion models came in, I think, 2020, 2021, somewhere in there. So, it's been not a huge amount of time, but it's not as if, this is the very first generation of these models. So what's very exciting is that, as people are starting to use this, it's not, just the very 1.0 version where we're going to have this huge, crash in expectation around what is actually possible.
The groundwork has been laid, if you will.
Yes.
You mentioned the internet, and I was talking with James Chan, who's a partner over at the venture capital firm Bloomberg Beta, and he was drawing that parallel to the internet circa mid to late 1990s as well, where it was one of that democratized access, at least if you were amongst the privileged few who had the internet. So it sounds like there's an element that you're saying here, which is again about the democratization of these tools, that everybody can start using them. But I guess I'm curious, it didn't, in internet, roughly late 90s, every business and business leaders were also waking up to this and realizing, no, well, every company needs to have a website. Every needs to have an online presence. And we need to figure out how it is that we're going to turn that into a new channel for how we drive and conduct our business. Are we at that point yet when it comes to generative AI, that every organization is starting to wake up to this, is starting to think that I need to have a strategy around leveraging generative AI? Or is it still too early?
So when it comes to generative AI and the internet of the 90s, we can look at them as metaphors, but I don't think they're totally in parallel. So in the 90s, we had companies say, okay, well, we need to get a presence on the internet. We need to have a stake in here. We need to just be there, which doesn't actually speak to why you're trying to do this. So it's trying to have a presence rather than leverage a tool. So I think honestly, I might draw a closer analogy to the rush to have some type of presence on the web in the late 90s without a strategy to folks that were running towards, Second Life in 2012 or the metaverse in 2021 to have a presence there just to have a presence. Whereas when we're looking at generative AI, it's not saying, well, I need to have a generative AI virtual environment. It's saying, well, what can I use these tools to do within my business and to either enhance my employees' productivity, to improve my workflows, to increase my customer engagement and retention. There's very specific questions around this. It's not just a kind of big hand wave we need to be here because this is going to generate a lot of money in the future. The questions that I get, they start with what is generative AI? What do we need to do about this? But it very quickly moves into a discussion around what do we need to think about, for our particular business, and how is this going to impact us? And broadly, I think that one of the big things that businesses need to keep in mind is that because there's so much discussion, hype, excitement around this right now, it really could just turn into a very heavily commoditized cacophony for some of these capabilities. So when businesses are looking at, we want to, be part of this really exciting train, it's very important to look at the differentiating capabilities and whether the capabilities that you're introducing, whether they're to support your internal employees or whether they're to deliver a better application or customer experience, that you're really being intentional with the approach to it. Because, everybody's going to have some, and, most companies, are already thinking about this, and many have already made announcements about, thinking about integrating or partnering or doing something in the future. But, taking an approach where you say, all right, this is how, we as, Acme anvils can really differentiate on, our product because, we know everything about anvils. So we can, fine tune our large language model to answer questions about that really, really specifically and then sell that to other folks. So looking at what are the differentiating capabilities that can be brought to these large language models or GANs or whatever other type of generative technique you want to use within your business context and within your application context is really, I think, where the focus needs to be here. Not just on saying, I really like playing with ChatGPT in my personal life. I want to have that, in my work experience. We're going to get there in some ways. I very much expect, especially with many of the enterprise AI ML platform vendors and the demos and the capabilities that they're introducing, that we will have something that is very much like a conversational naturalistic interface in many enterprise tools in a shorter time than I would have ever expected. But that is not the first step for most companies who are going to be building with this. And I think that is a really, really, really important thing to keep in mind is that because there's so much excitement, differentiation for your company is going to be key around this.
Well, it does bring us to that question of a sort of a build versus buy. Is this something where I can just participate in this technology by just leveraging the new capabilities that Microsoft is going to be bringing into its products, that Google is going to be bringing into its, and so on and so forth? Or is this one where no, actually, you are going to need to develop these models, customize them for your own needs, train it off of your own data, and go after your own applications. But I guess I am kind of putting the cart before the horse. Maybe we should probably talk about, well, what are those applications that organizations should be thinking about? Because obviously, it's generative AI. We automatically gravitate to the generative use cases for this, those that seem most human-like. Mm-hmm. But is that really the right place to start for most organizations? Should they be, there are all of these other capabilities that these models have that have been already applied for use cases in the natural language understanding space. Is that where folks should be starting? Where are you seeing the most low-hanging fruit, the applications that folks should probably start with?
Yeah, and I think this is another great reflection of how we shouldn't get too hyper-focused on the chat applications here, because the way that I've seen folks, implement the use of large language models within their broader application flows has really, been focused on very targeted sections of their application flow. So a really good public example of this is CarMax. So they're using the OpenAI APIs through Microsoft to take a very large swath of human-written customer reviews and summarizing them into concatenated versions that bring up all the topics and kind of give you a sense of what everybody is talking about. That is a really great use case because that creates new content for your users as part of their user experience, allows them to have a better way of navigating the knowledge that CarMax has, which is a huge asset to get to what their goal is, which is purchasing a car. And in that scenario, they don't have to, rely purely just on that summarized version. They can click through and see the full reviews if they want to. So use cases like that for the customer side, where it can enhance their experience, but it still allows them to see what the original content is, I think is a great way to apply this. So we've seen this with other companies as well, who are using their existing FAQ or question and answer guides on their websites to fine tune a large language model, and then basically have a natural language question and answer interface on their website that allows users to get much more comprehensive and contextual answers than they would normally be able to get. And then I'm also seeing, a lot of folks in the design and marketing and copywriting space using this as part of their workflow. And they're basically using it as a way to, build initial ideas, to translate content, say from a white paper to a blog post to a LinkedIn post without having to rewrite it. But also, interestingly, I've started to hear about folks using it to send internal copy around. So, just like doing a draft of, a customer message or, a particular messaging plan and sending it around to folks to kind of ideate on. So these use cases where it's kind of really focused either around, employee experience or around, improving customer experience, where it's not relying on generating arbitrary content, particularly arbitrary content at the time that the user is interacting with it. And then also there's, a lot of interesting use cases in the customer service and support side that are focused on the employee support. So, one of the big time expenditures in the customer service space, especially the call center space, is writing post-call notes, which can apparently take, 3-4 minutes for these folks to do, which doesn't seem like a lot of time, but then you multiply that by 100,000 call center agents, and that is a lot of time and a lot of money. So we're seeing the contact center and call center vendors folding in generative capabilities to do things like summarize those calls automatically, to create embeddings from policy documents so that those can be provided in scripts to the call center representatives more easily. So there's a lot of really cool behind the scenes uses for this. And that's only talking about kind of like the what people would traditionally kind of think of as generative AI. There's this whole additional swath of use cases that fall into the coding, software development, data science, and data analysis space that we've really just started to scratch the surface on. And I honestly think that the impact to the software development lifecycle and to developers and data scientists overall is going to be one of the biggest impacts, if not the biggest impact, of generative AI. And I'm saying that because I think it's going to be one of these things that changes the way that we do development and really accelerates, the complexity and the interconnectedness of different types of applications that we can build and brings more people into that application building conversation. But that's going to happen, largely behind the scenes. So I think most people are not going to be aware of how much of a difference generative AI makes to these things that are going on in the background. Because, we're all going to see, the chatbots, the image generation, the video generation. I have no doubt that we will have 100% AI generated at least 5-minute movies that are credible looking by the end of this year. I've already seen ones that are, they're the equivalent of like Dolly 1 or Dolly Mini, 10, 15-second movies that are totally generated. So the space is moving very fast and I expect to see a lot there. But I think the software development piece of this is something for enterprises particularly to really pay attention to, because whether, you provide, a customer service product or you're a consumer of one, or maybe you're an agency or whatever, like these are all, different types of use cases that may apply in your particular vertical. But software development is something that many companies share, and it impacts all of us, even if you don't have your own development team. So, I think this is just going to be a really huge development here. And at Forrester, we cover these as Turing bots because we kind of look at this not just the large language model question, but you also have the impact of things like GANs for generating synthetic data, for testing, and for modeling to further help accelerate the process.
Well, I mean, a common thread that goes through a lot of those use cases that you were describing is this one of sort of augmenting a human. It's whether that be in the case of offloading, automating very manual, repetitive tasks and driving productivity that way, whether that be in for a customer service individual or for a customer themselves and what they're trying to do, or for a software developer, or eventually maybe an analytics person or a data scientist. And so I guess that then. I'm wondering whether this is yet another example of the artificial intelligence makes your human intelligence more valuable, or is there something that folks need to be worried about when it comes to a lot of folks are raising their hands in fear about, oh my goodness, AI is coming for my job. And that's never been really true previously. Obviously, if you augment folks more, you maybe don't need as many of them. Or if you democratize a lot of those manual repetitive steps, maybe you also reduce the rewards to certain expertise or other things like that. Is that the case here? Is it that, augmentation's where it's starting out with, and eventually we're going to get to more and more automation, and folks do need to be worried? Or is this one of those things where actually this is increasing the returns to human intelligence, and it's actually making these jobs a lot better because you don't have to do the mindless, tedious summarizing call notes that you had to do before?
So I'm going to say, the classic worst analyst response, and I'm going to say it's going to be both. The reason that I think it's going to be both is because it really depends upon what type of jobs we're talking about. And the other reason that I say it's going to be both is both for historical trends and because I think we really don't understand what the impact of generative AI is going to be on a number of different job sectors. So, I have conversations with, tons of clients all the time. And one of the big questions for, many of them is, how does this impact not just, our internal functioning, but how does this impact our recruiting? How does this impact our org structure? So I think in the short term, this is going to transform a number of different jobs. It's going to, make it a lot easier for marketing to generate, many more iterations of campaigns. It's going to allow designers to, work through, different iterations of models and to localize them more easily, particularly if we look at, some of the newer enterprise tools that have been announced. So if we look at like Adobe Firefly, and the current capabilities are very solid there, but if we look forward to their in-painting and out-painting capabilities, that makes it very easy for a marketing team to localize content like without hardly any effort. And that's, that impact there will probably, decrease the willingness to pay for as many senior designers as they did in the past, but that may also open up the potential for some companies to say, well, now we have the ability to go after these smaller accounts because we have, this, generative AI support. So we can actually give, a junior person an account for them to handle entirely because they have this support from this model. But when we look farther down the road, like how is this going to impact the overall structure of like editing and publishing workflows? I think we really don't know right now because people are still kind of figuring out what the most efficient way to use these tools is. I think we can look to some early examples in both the software development space and also in the marketing space for what some of the difference might look like. And so my colleague Diego Lodiuj is covering Turing bots very, very closely. So he's looking at this real tight on this particular topic. But the thing that I've been hearing is that while you will increase the rate of your drafting and your ideation process and your prototyping process, whether it's for a campaign or whether it's an application, a piece of code, what that then leads to is a more resource intensive testing process that has to occur to make sure that the content that was generated is totally acceptable for the enterprise context. Now, I don't think that is going to really slow the advantages that are provided by generative AI, but I do think that is a good indicator of how we might need to think about the way that we're interacting with these things moving forward. Is thinking about, okay, what types of new oversight roles do we need to put in place? Like, do we have an AI governor for design as like a middle management role now, or something of that nature? So I think the roles and responsibilities are going to shift, and I think we will see some people will definitely lose their jobs. I do not want to be dishonest about that, and that is very painful, and that is not something we want to see overall. But overall, I do think that the new opportunities and new jobs that are created and enabled, and also just the focus of human cognition on what we are good at, around creativity and exploration and whatnot, that will be a very big benefit here. But I think that, people who do see this, coming into their job to adjacent jobs, one of the things to do here is, because this is such, an active and exciting space, and because there's so much discussion around it, there's a lot to learn here. So you can start to look at, okay, maybe I'm a copy editor. Start looking at, okay, what may be the impact of, a text generation tool on your job within your organization. I'm not going to speculate on it for like particular cases because it'll vary for everybody, but maybe it means, okay, I'll need to focus more heavily on whether the content really is moving our brand voice forward, or whether it is just adhering to the ways that we've done things in the past. So there may be kind of shifts in the way that people have to do their jobs in addition to what the jobs are.
Well, it almost sounds like there will be a job title at some point called AI supervisor, but it's not in the same way that folks envision of being having a whole bunch of different AI bots, Turing bots, whatever you'd like to call them, working for you, but in the sense of being the expert who can go in and know how to get what you need from that from a particular model, and be able to validate the results of it and improve and build on the results of it. So it's you are a better AI tool wielder, more than a supervisor having human-like models trying to undertake tasks automatically for you. Obviously, a tough one to summarize, but it sounds like if I tried to summarize it, your answer there, it would be one of, well, the folks who are able to take advantage of this obviously are going to do very well from this, because they're going to be able to be a lot more productive, and they're going to be able to focus their time and effort on the things that really require human intelligence in the first place. But for many, it's going to be painful, and certainly in a lot of industries, it's not something that you can ignore. So, given that, what are the first steps that organizations should take when thinking of a strategy? And maybe it would be helpful here to start with that build versus buy question. Within certain areas, you mentioned software development. We can access generative models through like GitHub Copilot, for example, in order to autocomplete large blocks of software code. So some of these things are available. A lot of them are going to be available from our productivity suites. to what degree do organizations need to be focused on? No, I'll be a fast follower. I'll focus on that. I will go in and see where my competitors are successful with these use cases and then jump on that when that happens. Versus to what degree should organizations be looking, no, either I need to instead or in tandem be looking at how we can create our own internal custom generative models and be spinning up teams that can go after and look for our unique use cases. Any thoughts on where folks should start?
Yeah, so I would say for right now, if you don't have development resources, innovation team, something of that nature, you could end up spinning your wheels trying to build a useful generative AI application. I think for companies, that are really just trying to understand what the opportunity is for them and, where they should start thinking directionally about going, a great way to start is to look at some subsection of your processes and look at where you could apply the strong points of things like large language models to that. So an example of that would be if you have, say, customers coming into your website and they have to, enter some information to a form. Using a large language model to do better intent identification when that user is coming in so that you can give them the best content and things of that nature. But it may be that for your particular use case that it doesn't actually make sense to use a large language model for that scenario because it's too expensive. The calls are too high volume. So you might end up using it to say like summarize your policies and procedure documents for your online search so that when a user searches for something, it gives them both that initial snippet and then also links them back to the original document. So I think really looking at the processes and like individual spots where a large language model could enhance what you're doing is a good place for a lot of folks to start who don't have the technology. And I do think one thing that kind of reiterates what I was talking about before, because everybody is jumping on this bandwagon, most vendors are going to have a story to tell you about what they are doing. So if you're a user company and you're interacting with other folks and trying to say, okay, well, like, what are you doing in this space? Most folks have some kind of answer right now. And that is how you can start to think about, okay, well, my contact center vendor is doing this, my ERP vendor is doing this, my CRM vendor is doing this. And because of, the process steps that I've identified, I should start working with, my CRM to, do natural language querying across my customer data sets. Maybe that's the highest value use case. So looking at sort of where you can use large language models to their advantage for the summarization, for the query translation, things like that, even for content localization. That's, I think, the way to look at it right now and to start taking an approach that gives you a strategic vision to the future is really looking at not just, okay, where can we, throw a whole large language model to replace a whole process, but where can we really target specifically these functionalities where they make sense? And then from there, you can start to explore, okay, well, does it make development sense? Does it make economic sense to build it ourselves? Does it make more sense to wait for our vendor in this space to release their capability because it's coming in just 2 months? And kind of taking that approach. One thing that I will say is that because this space is moving so quickly with regards to the model development and release, being very heavily locked into one particular model or solution or vendor or another could make it a bit challenging to keep up with the pace of the market. So I think overall taking an approach that is intentionally flexible towards the future and recognizing that you might have good ideas today that because of the advancements in the space are either 10 times better or total garbage by next week. So I think this is one of these spaces where we talk about the pace of change. It's increased over years and years, and so this is kind of like a broken record conversation. But this is almost a step change in the speed of advancement here, at least in terms of what is becoming available from the research space and driving forward the ideation in the enterprise and corporate space.
And a step change in the sense of just the access to this, that whereas previously
Yes.
your ability to go in and actually build an application off of this was extraordinarily limited and it would take a very long
Yes.
time, whereas right now you can put together a quick and easy application of something that was in a research paper last week in, it sounds like almost in a day or sometimes in a couple of hours.
I wouldn't
Not that
simplify it
not
to
production
that
quality,
degree.
but
Yeah. But yes,
prototypes.
broadly speaking, yes.
One of the things that I thought I heard you say was almost like, well, you should be paying attention to your vendors and the applications that they're going after, not just as a opportunity to go in and leverage your vendor for those capabilities, but actually because if they've spotted an opportunity there, it probably means there's actually an opportunity for you as well to go in and go after similar use cases and maybe go and drive additional value or additional customization than they might be going after. So it almost sounded like, well, yes, good, because you might be able to take advantage of them, but also a useful director because they probably have seen an area where there are going to be a range of different use cases that are going to be applicable to you, and they're only going to go after some of them. So you should probably be looking at those as well.
Yes, I think directionally that is a good thing to do. But what I would say with regards to those situations is that the vendor calculation in terms of what is a good use case may be very different because of their economic model than you as an end user. So, they might be, engaging with a vendor that is giving them a deal on very high volume, interactions over a period of time. So that might be, a great use case for, immediately transcribing calls when they come in. But for you at your company, that is probably not necessary to transcribe them immediately. And it might be, and summarize them immediately. And it might be too expensive for you to do that on a individual company scale. So I think, directionally is a good way to look at this for, what are the types of applications that we can look at, but it may not be, one-to-one mapping with what exactly your company can do. And then there also are other layers to this as well, because vendors, they may have access to data sets that are broader in terms of how many different companies they cover for the fine tuning of these models. So they may be able to get more out of these particular use cases because of the fine tuning that they can layer on top of the base model than an individual company might be able to do with their own data. But on the flip side of that, if you are a company that has lots of very specific and interesting, especially language data over the past, 5, 10, 20 years, that can be a real differentiator for you in terms of the products and capabilities that you might be able to build.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly used to be the case that we tended to think of the vendors of having an advantage on the data side of things, that, well, we couldn't train it ourselves because we didn't have the data. We certainly didn't have the label. We didn't have enough examples of it, and it wasn't labeled and annotated. It feels like with the foundation models / large language models, generative models, that advantage seems to have gone away somewhat. That folks, because there is now pre-trained models that are trained on very, very large corpuses of data that's out there, that your ability to overcome that initial data challenge seems to be less talked about than before. Is that accurate? Is that one of the things that these models have brought is this that they come pre-trained to enough of a degree that really now you can just start adding on your own custom data to this and getting superior performance, versus previously this was unless you are a vendor interacting with a whole bunch of different customers and are able to go in and suck in their data and go in and use that to train your models, you really couldn't play in the space. And now I don't hear people speaking about that as much. Is that because of the architecture of these models?
Yeah, so I think that because they have such a large corpus of data that they're pre-trained on, you are able to arbitrarily apply them to use cases without any further fine-tuning or further training on your side. Now, I don't think so what that is doing right now is making a lot of companies very excited for them to be able to do things that they previously either had to, have a very expensive or a very highly customized model to do. What I think this is going to do is very quickly raise the bar for what is expected for the capabilities of these highly data-driven differentiations from companies. So folks who have, very heavily relied on, their specific ontologies and taxonomies around, whatever type of horizontal or vertical application it is, I think there's still going to be an advantage there, but they're going to have to very quickly take that advantage from just, being able to train a good base model and take it and say, we can give you the best version of whatever it is, GPT-4 or Llama or PaLM or Bison or whatever it is, because it is fine-tuned on our data. And so it is really specific to manufacturing or oil and gas or, high-tech communications or whatever it is, more so than their competitors.
Gotcha. So if I understand you correctly, it's that there still is a return to that data. So the folks who have access to that specialized data that is valid for your either vertical or your particular use case, that is not replicable, or that is still a very legitimate advantage versus that it would already come pre-trained with that degree of knowledge that the competitive advantage wasn't there in quite the same way. And one other thing that I wanted to ask, though, when you were describing the use cases that organizations should go after, it struck me that you were describing instances where folks were either working with, or trying to analyze, or to generate unstructured data. And I guess I was curious whether or not this was sort of a rule or best practice when it comes to, well, where can I drive value with generative AI? Well, look at my processes and follow the data, in this case, unstructured data. Is there unstructured data that folks aren't able to use, or that it's very, very time consuming to be able to process and tackle that? But is that the case?
So, yes, the large portion of use cases, I would say, are on the unstructured data side at this point in time. I think the way that you can use generative AI with structured data at this point in time is largely in terms of the way that you can interact with it overall. So, natural language querying has been, one of the big holy grails of business intelligence for, 10 years, maybe. This very much puts that capability into the hands of almost every BI vendor that exists. And you can even just start to build it yourself now. And then you can also see kind of the first indications of the ability to, ask for visualizations and displays of structured information with these queries as well, with the integration with Sheets and with Excel that we've had previewed from Google and Microsoft. But largely right now, the data is around the unstructured side, the language-based side. So I think you identified that very well. And I think that what this does is it allows companies to interact with that data in a way that they previously hadn't been before. We've had a ton of advances for how to explore, interact, dive into structured data over the past 10, 15 years. But this really gives us a different way of interacting with unstructured data than we have previously had. And to, you're not going to get, the exact right answer to all of your questions from just putting your corpus up against one of these models, but you will be able to get broader based answers than you previously could with, having no tools or having, some of these previous tools that existed. So you can say, what are the trends in Malaysia, but you can't ask, what is this specific person doing in Jakarta or something like that.
And now you have that range of flexibility and that richness of ways in which you can query your data that you didn't previously, right?
Yes, and that natural language querying along with the software development piece, that's going to be so huge for the impact on the broader market, I think. Yeah.
Well, it's a natural extension of search in some respects, and we've already seen it be very powerful on search. So then in terms of capabilities that folks should be thinking about in terms of leveraging this, there's a especially if you are looking to create your own custom versions of these models targeted for your particular use cases, trained on your data, what do folks need? Presumably, go out and hire a data scientist is probably not enough. You need to, there aren't data scientists with enough background in this. Naturally, you do need to, you need probably a talent strategy, but what other things, what do folks need to be able to go in and say, okay, well, I've got some ideas for what we're going after. We've maybe even have played with some of them, and we know that they'll be valuable. How do I actually go out and build some of these things?
So the way right now, I think, to look at this is to use some of the very well documented tools if possible. So I would say, if you are a Microsoft shop, go and start using the Azure OpenAI APIs. If you are a Google shop, try and get access to the new Vertex capabilities. Because one of the things that folks are finding it hard to do with kind of the base models is you need to have natural language professionals and experts at your company to actually do the training and fine tuning if it's not, within this well-described kind of enterprise type context. So, as I've been speaking to clients, we've had folks that are able to just kind of leverage their machine learning engineers and their developers into being able to fine tune the existing versions of the models and just start experimenting with how you would build and test with them. But if you're trying to say take BERT or a version of Cobert or taking the GPT-2 framework and then training your own model from scratch, that requires that requires data scientists. It requires natural language subject matter experts in data science. And so when we're talking about approaching these models, I think the idea of training your own model from scratch is not necessarily where most companies should be looking at this point in time. And because there's a world of difference between fine-tuning a model that has already been pre-trained. You can do that with a question and answer set, like a regular software developer who has some understanding of machine learning can kind of work with that and start to build with that. But training your own model from scratch, from zero, that is a big undertaking that requires data scientists. It requires data pipelining. It requires refinement of the results. It requires this whole loop of interacting with and getting responses from the model and providing feedback and directing it. So all that is to say, there's many, many components if you're trying to train it yourself. But if you're really just trying to take one of the extant models that is available from these web services, you can get started if you are a competent developer who has some knowledge of machine learning, or even if this is your first foray into machine learning, you can start to kind of explore the space from this as a jumping off point as well. So I think the talent gap overall is currently in the sort of the training side, and it may hash out in terms of the application side as well. Sort of what are the best ways to apply these models as the first few people start to build them out. It may come down, okay, well, we really need to have, more advanced machine learning experts working with these models to build them effectively so that we can actually do things like, test them in reasonable ways and do QA. Whereas, it may also shake out that the regular developers are great at this as well. I think that part of this is yet to be told in terms of how these are released into production at scale and what the impact of them is there.
So I could see that you would want to use an existing web service for prototyping, for going and understanding the art of the possible, maybe creating the first versions of an internal application off of them. But I would think that it would be, once you then want to make it real, once you want to turn it into something that's going to be at the core of some of your processes, or that is going to be very much in the hands of end users, customers, or even large numbers of your own folks internally, that yes, you would still work with extent models out there from Hugging Face or elsewhere, but you would be looking to do your own internal training of it and deploy it internally. Versus if you're doing that from an extent web service, one, there are going to be limitations in terms of your ability to customize, your ability also then to own and make sure that that you have ownership of the extent model and can continue to use it if you're not leveraging that web service, and also just on the cost side of things, your ability to go in and deploy this at scale would vary. Now, obviously, that's the second step for this, but I'm curious whether or not, or no, would you see it as being that no, you could actually have as viably as your strategy just to stick with those services from a cloud vendor?
I think it really depends upon what your longer term plans for this are and what the use case is. So, we have plenty of SaaS applications that we don't really understand what is going on behind the scenes with what they're doing. And I think when it comes to, embedded generative AI capabilities, it'll be largely the same in the market. I think that there are, specific concerns for generative AI around like IP and copyright and stuff like that, where you will get more assurance by working with somebody, like an Adobe or a Getty or a Shutterstock, who's like, or Microsoft even, their new release is going to be trained on all their own data, this is our IP. You don't have to worry about, somebody suing you down the road for the use of a model generated from this.
So there's value in that, and it's also when you've got a more standard use case, when what you're going after is very similar to the needs of others. And again, the copyright issues are well taken, or an IP ownership issues, I guess, are well taken into account. Am I correct?
Yes, yeah. And I think there's also, to kind of extend that, there's going to be a spectrum of customization that is needed here. So I think probably most companies will be able to use their off-the-shelf embedded generative capabilities within whatever application they buy from a vendor anyway, like they've been doing with, predictive marketing, ERP systems and logistics management systems for years, right? Then I think there's, going to be the next step where there's folks that are really, data-driven in their industry, like we need to differentiate on the knowledge that we have internally. That's our moneymaker. They're going to fine-tune the models to a greater degree than those folks, and really, I'm guessing we'll do more work around directing the models, like priming them to particular activities and whatnot. And then we'll have the folks that are more technology focused, or who have a real, differentiation that's at its core based upon the data that they have accumulated over years. And those will be the folks that are building their own models from scratch. But I expect this to, not be quite a 1-9-90 kind of thing. But I think it's going to be close to that. So kind of the range that I'm expecting to see over the next couple of years is that we'll have maybe a few dozen well-known, like quote unquote, foundational models that are used for a bunch of different purposes. Then we'll have, let's say, a few thousand distilled versions of those models, or versions that are trained for a specific type of use case. And then we're going to have, millions of models that are fine-tuned either for a whole enterprise or for like a really tiny piece of a particular enterprise application. And at that point, these may be heavily distilled models where they're, the footprint is no longer 1.5 terabytes for the whole model and running it, but it's down to, a couple hundred megabytes or smaller, so that you can actually use these in many, many different places. So I think there's going to be a breadth of methods of applying these models. And it's one of these things where it's going to be very, very similar to enterprise software overall. Like people who want to experiment and run fast will build their own things. And the people who are a little bit more cautious will get it from their vendors. And then over time, we'll kind of figure out a middle ground where, the customization is needed, but you don't need to totally build a whole new system for this.
Well, it sounds like that split will also exist within companies. So in the same way that an organization is going to be purchasing a lot of commercial off-the-shelf software, and it's going to be leveraging platforms like CRM systems, ERP systems, where it's doing customization on top of that, but it would still also develop in-house a whole host of different applications that are core to their value proposition. So their mobile application experience, or their the rich content content delivery platform that they're creating, if it is where it is strategic for the business. So it sounds like, well, similar to over here, we should be expecting within a sufficiently large organization that some of these they're just going to be consuming from the vendors, some of them they're going to be consuming from more prepackaged solutions which have customization opportunities for it. But then there are also going to be these use cases which are going to be very specific to the business and very core to how it operates, that are where folks are going to go and have to develop their own.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to encapsulate it. Yeah, I think that's spot on. I think, again, with every other type of enterprise software, when you get to like large companies, even if they're saying, we have a platform approach and we're doing this one thing, you're going to find 5, 10, 100 different things that they're actually doing in any case. So yeah, I think when it comes to larger organizations, we're going to find more pockets of specialization in terms of the approach, because it might be, that they have a very particular like SKU for one like product that needs to have its own, GPT model that is using all of their data and nobody else's, but that might not be connected to anything else, within their organization. Like if it's a log management system or something like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of folks are intimidated by the idea of just how much data and how much training is required. I mean, folks have heard about the enormous cost and infrastructure to go in and train GPT-3, let alone GPT-4. Obviously, there are certain use cases which are going to be that intense and are going to require a lot more data and a lot more training. The models are going to be a lot larger. But to what degree is this something that companies should be worried about up front? The cost considerations, the infrastructure challenges, and the like.
So I think for most companies, the infrastructure challenges, that should not be top of their worry list, because they shouldn't be thinking about the things that would lead them to worry about the infrastructure right now. I think that it's the age-old question of like, is our data in order? That is a very big aspect of this, because you don't have well-curated data in the right format. It's going to be very hard to fine-tune the model for your particular use case. So with a lot of these models, you need to basically give it like a set of questions and answers, and then work through those questions and answers with it to help it understand the data a bit more. And if you don't have, information that can be structured in that way or is structured in that way, then it becomes more of a challenge for how you actually apply that knowledge to the model to get to whatever application you're trying to build with it.
It does sound like, though, maybe you should also be looking into strategies for going in and either creating or annotating and labeling the data that you already have. So I'm thinking, I believe, do you have upcoming research on, say, synthetic data and annotation and labeling solutions that might be relevant here that folks should look at?
Yeah, so this is a really, really interesting question. So the whole synthetic data piece is a very interesting, adjunct to the generative AI space, because you use similar techniques sometimes for generating synthetic data. But this whole question of how do you actually, do sourcing for AI, for data that you're going to use to train AI models is a really tough one. And we are actually working on some research around this now, and hopefully there will be a report from myself and my colleague Michelle Getz around sourcing data for AI in the next couple months. It's definitely something that we focus on pretty heavily. We have a whole framework called the Connected Intelligence Framework that really is about describing what the whole landscape for delivering data for AI is in terms of roles, tools, responsibilities, that whole picture. So this is a challenging problem for a number of different companies. And it's not a new problem, but it's one that becomes even more valuable to take advantage of as we move forward with these large language models and other.
Well, and it sounds like it's helpful on both sides. It's helpful both when it comes to feeding your ability to train a generative AI model, but also in terms of that your generative AI models can sometimes help with with some of your data problems as well.
Yes, precisely.
We were talking a little bit about challenges and risks. I guess, are there other big challenges that you're seeing and risks that folks should be taking into consideration? Now, obviously, Timnit Gebru over at Google very early on started raising the issues of, well, but what data is being used to train these generative AI models? If that data is highly biased or unfair, then naturally you're encoding that into a model, and it is just now going to scale those kinds of potentially biased or unfair decisions or content that it's creating. How much of that is a real worry for organizations right now, or is this one where, well, we're not going to be able to really mitigate that risk until we know what the application is? It's much easier to go in and then mitigate that afterwards. Or is this one where no, folks need to be really very concerned about this up front?
So this is a situation where I would say that I think that Dr. Gebru makes great points, and I very, very much respect her and her view on this. I think that the amount of caring from actual enterprises about these issues right now is not to the degree that it makes an impact on their adoption of the models right now. I don't think that that is necessarily, the way that we want the state of the world to be. And I think that the announcement of GPT-4 without any indication of what the data sources were or what the parameters were, that is not the level of transparency and clarity that I would hope we would be adopting as an industry standard. So I think that, there is an undeniable risk that is introduced when you do not understand what the core data is that is training models that you are using. However, lots of us use plenty of models that we don't understand what the underlying training data is every day. Like, if we just go for a very simple example, like all of the social media filters, like as a consumer example, those all use computer vision models that are trained on data sets that you have no idea what they were trained on. And those can result in really bad and biased experiences for users when you don't look into it deeper. So, we had a bunch of issues still ongoing, but especially several years ago, where facial recognition software, other types of image recognition would not recognize people who did not have a very light skin pallor, and that was really problematic. And we saw similar things with sort of the predictive models that were applied to I think it was Amazon's HR, and recidivism, yeah. And so I think that there are issues with this, with not understanding what these data sets are, and I think that one of the things that I'm very hopeful about, things like auto labeling, things like multimodal large language models, are to actually look at these data sets and get a better understanding of, all of the content within them by using these automated tools to look at them, because the data sets are just far too large for any human to audit within a reasonable cost or amount of time. But when it comes to, the application of these models, I think that, the same type of trust that we put into, Microsoft and Google and Amazon to house our enterprise data, to run our analytics, to do all these other things, I think that this is not a difference in kind. And I think that looking at it as a fundamental difference does not really approach what the challenge is here. Like, the challenge is that we need to do a better job of auditing our data, full stop, overall. It is not a problem that is particular to large language models. Large language models perhaps highlight that to us even more so because the data sets that drive them are much, much larger. And because since they're neural networks, we can't really understand why they are doing the things that they're doing in a one-to-one fashion. So I think that, so to sum that up, the risks are, there to a certain degree for the enterprise, but I think, the broader concerns are kind of how this impacts how we use these models and how we train AI more broadly and how we are thinking about what is going into that training data. So, one of the things about these large language models is that because they are trained on, written content, you are largely excluding people who have not, and people's thoughts and minds who have not contributed to that corpus, which leads to certain languages being excluded, certain perspectives and whatnot being excluded, which if we are trying to build generalized models that we can use for any arbitrary use case, we need to be very conscious of the fact that we are excluding certain perspectives from this, because we can't have these models do a thing and then make a claim that says, oh, humans as a whole think this, because that is not what these models are trained on.
Well, I think I hear in what you're saying also that we also need to get better at auditing our decisions and our content, full stop, whether or not that's created by humans or whether that's created by generative AI models. It's one where the benefit, arguably, I guess, on the generative AI side is that we can, unlike on humans, we can go in and put in those guardrails around the inputs. And we can do probably a better job of testing and determining whether the models are inherently biased or unfair in a way that we really can't do with people. So it sounds like yes, there is an area where we need to get better at this, obviously. But it sounds like there's also ones where we need to recognize the opportunity that we can actually become more ethical in our decision making and in our content and things by leveraging these models, where we can go in and address some of these things where we can't really on the people side of things, potentially. But
yeah.
That's my rosy tinted hope when it comes to artificial intelligence generally. I guess lastly, and we've talked about just how rapid the pace of change is. Would love to get your sense on where this is going, because when we make analogies to the past, certainly it's easy. We can make analogies to the internet going mainstream. The other analogy that I often think of is smart speakers, Alexa and Siri, where all of a sudden this was again creating the first AI experience that most people were able to have, and in your own home, and it was ubiquitous. But those AI smart speakers have not taken over the world. They're still there, but they serve a particular niche, versus say something like the internet, which is embedded in our lives today, and we really couldn't envision otherwise. Are there roadblocks that we see that could prevent generative AI or turn generative AI into something which looks more like smart speakers versus the internet?
Yeah, for sure. So I think one of the things that could inhibit, broader growth is if we are unable to actually get the model distillation process to be very efficient and to be able to be broadly applied. This was one of my big worries, honestly, until a couple of weeks ago when we saw the advances with the alpaca model. But I think, beyond sort of the questions around the capabilities of storage and compute around these things, I don't think there's any question that they will be very broadly used and within a whole variety of different applications. I think one of the differences here from the sort of smart speaker moment to this is that, smart speakers are, they are a form factor. They are a way of interacting with the world that is very specific. The AI behind it was not really flexible. It's pretty fragile. Like, it had to be very heavily, imparted with rules and stuff like that to actually be able to do its intelligent stuff. Whereas with these models, it's not contained to a particular form factor. You can apply it to a number of different scenarios. And I think what is very interesting here, which we haven't touched on at all, but I think is going to be very interesting for the future of work around this, is the change in expectations and imagination and capability from all of the people who are in undergrad right now, all the kids who are in high school and middle school right now. I have a number of friends who are professors who are dealing with this in different ways, but already their students are using this as a regular part of their workflows. I have a couple of friends who are still undergrads as well, who are just part of their life now. And I'm thinking about, my friends who have younger kids who the use of large language models is just going to be the same level of familiarity and almost, invisibility as using Wikipedia as a first step source is to us. So I think that, it's the big changes are going to really come when the people who are normalized to this as part of their daily lives start to enter the workforce and build experiences, applications, and other things based upon these and whatever else comes after. Because if you kind of look at the internet and the iPhone, the first set of websites and applications that were built off them were kind of cool, but like they weren't that like innovative. It was like, oh, look what we can do with this with the iPhone. Oh, look, we can have a Ruby and we can charge $10,000 for the image of a Ruby. Like that's not an innovative application. But then you look 5-6 years on, in 2000, 2001, you had many more businesses that had useful websites that were able to do things. You had individual users just building tons of sites all over the place. With the tools that they had been, just given through GeoCities and AngelFire. And then if you look at like the phones, we didn't get, the game changers of Uber and Lyft and things like that changed the way that we did transport until a couple of years afterwards. And then, things like doing fitness tracking and whatnot through phones, that didn't really mature until, several years after the initial release of the iPhone. So to me, the very exciting things are the things that you and I can't even imagine because it's just not part of the way that our brains grew up thinking. And that I think is going to be very interesting because I think we've already seen some interesting changes with, between the people who grew up with no internet versus those who grew up alongside the internet versus, the people like the Gen Zs who grew up with that as a ubiquitous part of their life. We all interact with this technology in very different ways. So I'm super excited to see how the LLM natives come up and start dealing with this technology.
Well, we've been skirting around the other big G in the sense of we've talked about generative AI, but the other big G in the AI space would be general AI or general artificial intelligence. And it's not that. I think we can all agree that we are not talking about AI models that are replicating the more advanced parts of human intelligence, but it is general in the sense of just its broad applicability to so many use cases and so many settings. And I guess if we had to choose between those two different definitions of general, I think we the one in terms of its ubiquity and its ability to be complementary to a human intelligence, that we'd prefer that one than the AGI that is of science fiction that folks are starting to envision or starting to see glimmers of in generative AI.
There's been some couple reports around it, but I am very, very cautious about any type of anthropomorphization of these models. I think that can lead us into not very helpful spaces. And I think what is very important is to recognize that at some point we may need to look at how we deal with these applications and may need to think about, ethical responsibilities towards these applications, maybe not in terms of personhood per se, but, them having some type of experience that is worthy of consideration. I absolutely do not think that we are there yet. And because of our ability to project human experience onto anything, we hear the twig snap in the jungle. Is it a tiger or is it, just a random thing that happened? So I think that I'm very cautious about the applying artificial general intelligence in terms of knowing, being able to do everything. But in terms of being able to be generalized to a certain task, I think we are certainly expanding our capabilities here. But I do think it is important to continue the conversation around, what would we need to see to consider this to be, something worthy of ethical consideration, and what do we do then? Because it's probably going to happen sooner than a lot of us expect.
It sounds like there's now a pathway to it with generative AI in a way that you go back a couple of years ago and there just was no pathway to even getting there. Whereas now, maybe this could take us there one of these days.
Yeah, agreed.
Rowan, thank you very, very much for all your time and your insights. This has been a fascinating conversation. If folks want to follow your research or get in touch with you, is there a best way to do it? Should they follow you on LinkedIn or on your Forrester blog?
Yeah, so I think the best ways to kind of get a download of my insights are to follow me on LinkedIn. I tend to, repost a lot of articles that I find very interesting over there, especially ones that are maybe not the mainstream conversation sometimes. Then I also do have a Forrester blog, and you can always, feel free to send me an email, rcurran@forrester.com. I love talking about this stuff all the time. So yeah, I mean, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation, Shell. Like, I love talking about this, and I think this is a very, very exciting frontier for AI. I don't think I could be more excited about it at this point in time.
Yeah. Rowan, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you so much. It's been great being here.
You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.